Rick Carver is involved in real estate. He takes away people's housing by court order, and he does it almost immediately after the issuance of such a document. In addition, Rick pulls off other real estate frauds in order to make as much profit as possible. When he arrived at the next debtor, he took out a weapon and withdrew himself. He is survived by his wife and children, but neither the deceased nor his relatives worried Carver. He needed to vacate the house as soon as possible, which was what he was doing. Friendly neighbor Dennis Nash works as a construction worker. He knows a lot and does a good job, but in the course of completing another project he finds out that he will not be paid. The customer was not given a loan for the construction of the house and the construction had to be curtailed. 2 weeks were wasted. At the same time, Nash has his own loan that needs to be paid off. He mortgaged the house, and if he defaults, he will be taken away for debts. When financial difficulties arose, Dennis turned to the bank, and they specifically gave him very bad advice. He did not have a spider's nose, and he could not recognize the deception. As a result, on the advice of bankers, he did not pay for a couple of months, and satisfied bank lawyers went to court. Nash came to the meeting with his son Connor. He tried to explain to the judge how much this house was dear to him, and that he was ready to start paying off the loan again, just to keep it. But the judge was adamant. He reviews a bunch of similar cases in a day, and in each case there are excuses. Even appealing to the judge's conscience did not help Nash, because a child who would be on the street came with him. He should be at school, not here. If we get evicted, he won't be able to go to school. He was given 30 days to appeal or he will be evicted. Dennis lived with his mother, whose name was Lynn. After telling her what had happened, he began calling lawyers who could help him for free or for a minimal fee. But it was not possible to find an intelligent lawyer. Things were no better with work. Things got really bad when Rick Carver and a couple of cops he knew came to see him the next day after the trial. They helped him evict debtors. Nash tried to explain to him that he had another month, but Carver didn't care. He had a document in his hands that the house now belongs to the bank. The Nashes were given 2 minutes to collect their personal belongings. Carver's men dragged the rest out into the street in front of the house. Connor returned from school at that moment. He was terrified of what was happening. Nash had to take his mom and son to a cheap motel where poor guys like him lived. But Dennis wasn't going to stay here for long. He would find a job and get their house back. However, that's exactly what the problem was. They didn't want to hire Nash. Either there was no vacancy in the companies he called, or there were other difficulties. When he returned home, he discovered that an expensive tool he had bought for construction was missing. Dennis realized that one of Carver's workers had stolen the tool. He went to the office of this realtor to sort it out and almost started a fight here. At that moment, Carver appeared. He just needed people urgently, and he offered Nash to cut down 50 kopecks quickly. He agreed. When we arrived at the facility, it became clear that you couldn't get away with 50 here. The owners of the house where they went knew that their housing would soon be taken away from them, so they disabled the sewage system. Now all the rooms were filled with shit. Carver's guys didn't clean it up, but Nash got down to business. For $250, he agreed to remove the feces. Rick promised to pay and did not cheat. Returning to the family with the money, Nash pleased his son and mother. Shortly after, Carver called Dennis to his house to fix the wiring problems. Nash did it quickly, and Rick realized that this guy could be useful. He offered to work for him. Carver is willing to pay a lot, but he will have to do a lot. As they were driving through a residential area, Rick noticed one of the debtors stealing water and electricity from a neighboring house, from which the tenants had already been evicted. He asked the owner to stop doing that. Nash knew this guy, their kids were friends. Moreover, Frank Green was in court the day Dennis was deprived of his home. He himself could lose the house in the near future. Nash did not work for Carver on a permanent basis. At first, he simply removed the air conditioners from the arrested houses, as well as pumps for swimming pools. For this purpose, he invited a friend to help him. Without such equipment, it will be more difficult for the bank to sell the house. Carver used it to make money. Nash also got his share. In addition, he went to the homeowners to inform them that they would soon be evicted. He offered services to Rick's company, but he was mostly sent far away. Although there were some who agreed to cooperate, Nash couldn't stand the job. He himself had recently lost his home, so he perfectly understood those to whom he was talking about the imminent eviction. but he needed the money to get his own house back. So, you have to step over yourself and keep doing what you get paid for. Finally, Nash saved up enough to try to get his place back. When he told Carver about this, Carver offered to buy out his house and sell it to Dennis in installments. Nash agreed, but they wouldn't be able to return to their apartment for another couple of weeks. To pay off Carver, Dennis will have to deal with the eviction of debtors himself. Rick offered Nash a pistol for self-defense, because sometimes you have to deal with completely beaten-down owners. But Dennis refused. He was sure he could handle it anyway. When he arrived at his first client's house for eviction, he was met by the same cops who had kicked Nash's family out of the house. Together, they began to process the next debtor. He and his wife and children were put out on the street. Dennis felt terrible and tried to soften the moment somehow, but he was not doing well. Returning to your home helped sweeten the pill. Nash grew up here, he had his own son here, and he couldn't leave this place. When he brought Connor and Lynn here, they were surprised that the house belonged to them again. When Lynn found out that Carver was helping Dennis, she was upset. She wants nothing to do with this man. Nash continued to evict people for their debts. He came across different characters. Some were renting and hadn't even heard about the impending eviction. Others were too old to understand all this. So one old man just didn't know where to go, because he had no relatives or friends left in this city. The police decided to identify him to the Red Cross, and then they would figure out where the old man would go next. With each new eviction, Nash felt worse and worse. They've already tried to attack him. One of the debtors met him with a gun. So Dennis asked Carver for a gun. He was always armed because they often tried to settle scores with him. He was constantly receiving threatening phone calls, but he did not respond to this. His father was a simple construction worker who died at work, and the family received nothing on insurance. Rick fought his way up from the bottom and won't back down until he reaches the top. And the peak was already looming on the horizon. There was a prospect of cutting a substantial jackpot. You only need to process 100 debtors, and then Carver will receive an order for 1,000 houses. With this deal, Nash will receive at least $200,000. Rick advises him to forget about the old house and buy another one. This way he will not only invest money profitably, but also begin to live in a big way. Driving by Frank Green's house one day, Nash stopped by to give advice on the future proceedings in court. He was confident that the judge would rule in favor of the bank and advised him to prepare for this in advance. But Green didn't want to talk to Dennis. He despised him for working with Carver. This couple pulled off a lot of illegal frauds. Over time, it stopped seeming like something reprehensible to Dennis. He was just making money for his family, but they still had to live in a motel. And when they celebrated Connor's birthday, there was a new tenant. He recognized Nash and started accusing him of evicting him from the house. Dennis tried to justify himself, saying it wasn't him, but the man remembered him. "Your name is Nash, right? And you don't want everyone here to find out some bullshit?" He told all the neighbors that Carver's henchmen lived next to them, and Nash began to receive threats. Realizing that his loved ones were in danger, Dennis advised them to lock themselves in until he found a place for them to live. Meanwhile, he and Carver had landed a major contract thanks to their machinations, and now they were celebrating the event. After getting drunk, Nash confessed that he was grateful to Rick for the opportunity to earn money. He just didn't know what to do when he lost everything. Carver, in Dennis' opinion, saved him. After receiving the money, Nash bought a mansion and brought his family there. Lynn immediately suspected that the property had been bought with the money earned from the evictions. She didn't want to live here, and when she found out that Dennis had sold their old house, she got angry. Lynn thought it would be better to move to relatives in another city than to stay in this place. Connor took her side. He didn't like what his father was doing. Soon Carver started having problems. It turned out that Frank Green could keep his house, and this will cause a chain reaction, and they will lose a lucrative contract. To prevent this, Carver prints out a fake backdated document and tells Nash to take it to court. After seeing the paper, the judge will deprive Green of housing. Dennis arrives at the court, but for a long time he does not dare to hand over the document. Finally, Carver's friend finds him and takes the envelope himself. As a result, Frank Green's family is losing their home. Arriving at the mansion after the trial, Nash realizes that Lynn and Connor have left. He was left alone, drunk out of grief, and Carver woke him up in the morning. I should have gone to seize Frank Green's place. Neighbors have already gathered at the house, and familiar cops have arrived to help evict the tenants. They talked to the neighbor and found out that Green is a hunter, and he may have a weapon in his house. As luck would have it, Nash left his gun at home. When they tried to evict Frank, he broke a window and threatened the police. He was sure that he had been wrongfully convicted. People could have been hurt, so Nash came forward and confessed that he had indeed delivered the forged document to the court. He said this because he could not do otherwise for reasons of conscience. Realizing that he was right, Green laid down his weapon and surrendered to the police. Dennis was also escorted to a police car and put back in. Yes, and Carver was taken up for suspicion of fraud. Nash sat in the car and watched as the authorities talked to his boss.